Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on Sunday, September 22nd.
That's right.
So we're back on the ranch.
Right.
We're back at Lineport.
But it's
no field trips today.
85 degrees on September 22nd.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's super crazy, but it's a beautiful weekend.
Yeah.
Amazing bike rides.
Yes.
You know, I'm still thinking about Percy Park.
Good for you.
That was a really, well, what the audience doesn't know is that we did go for a stroll around the grounds and saw these different cottages that had been built in the 19th century all over the grounds. And they really were interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Some of them were over the top with crazy decor and a lot of yard ornaments, lawn ornaments. And some were very simple and had just really interesting details. And it was fun. And I was thinking more and more about that whole camp meeting craze that was going on in the 19th century.
Yeah, look, I think it was a very pleasant place to be. And it is interesting. The whole concept of it is interesting. I will tell you that, the idea of having just summer housing that's something short of permanent housing, but that people kind of thrive in a sense of community and drive that much more from being in these units somewhat close together over the course of 3 or 4 months.
With a common interest.
With a common interest. Now, that's the thing.
In this case, it's, it's religious, it's spiritual.
Well, originally it was. And so as I mentioned it to folks in New York City in the last week, just describing Percy Park, after explaining to them what Percy was, they no one had ever heard of Percy, they couldn't quite get it. Then I mentioned the religious aspect. They went, oh, yeah, no interest in that. There was very much that reaction.
Well, I was thinking about it. And there are other great ones that we know about, like Ocean Grove in New Jersey, that's actually tents with a little shed in the back and a kitchen and a bathroom. And then apparently there are a bunch of them in the Northeast, all over the place, all being built in like the 1870s. Okay. There's also Chautauqua, which is in upstate New York, right? But that has a whole educational aspect.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, but
it's religious as well, and there's even like a recreation to scale of Palestine on the grounds. But it's quite focused on arts, music, literature lecturing as well. People still go to that. The Adams, like Matthew Adams, Granger's friend, their family has gone there for years.
Plus, the economics of this interest me. I mean, sure, there are a lot of economic challenges for people, and sometimes everything seems awfully expensive. Percy Park isn't terribly expensive, and the places you're mentioning, the Ocean Grove is not terribly expensive. I can just tell. So,
prices have gone up, but it's a nice alternative. You think about resorts, and you think about wild times. Well, you think about people drinking, etc., and carrying on. Not everybody wants to do that.
Right.
But even Christians want to cool off in the summer. So I can understand wanting to be in a place where you're not going to participate or be upset by other activities.
The greater interest to me is the notion you can find communities of common interest that are non-religious, that probably aren't economically imposing. And it's a good solution. It's a comfortable environment, if not even a stimulating environment that one might seek out and spend some time. So it kind of opens your eyes a little bit.
As we walked through Percy Park, everybody on their porch said hello.
That's right.
Started conversations, ran out to talk to us.
That's right.
So that if you're looking for community and nature, that's a great alternative.
So it's good to know. It's good to know it's out there.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Even in the 21st century. So we did the exact opposite though this week. You have to admit, we went to the opposite extreme in terms of the way human beings live their lives and congregate. And then we went to a New York City jazz club on Thursday night. We went to.
What was my idea?
Quite apart from whose idea it was.
I'm never anxious to drive into the city, right?
Yeah.
Because especially this term, I'm teaching a lot. But I had heard from the New York Times that Helen Sung was playing at a little club in the West Village.
Right. So here we are, the small town folks that we are, coming to New York City while I'm there working. But Tamsen joined me. And now we're downtown in a village, and we go to some, I won't say trendy, but I would say somewhat hip downtown village restaurant, which was called... well,
I don't know if it's hip,
what's it
but
called?
It's called Mary's Fish Camp.
Okay, there you go.
So, I got there early.
Teeny place.
I walk around the area. It's got every bar and restaurant I've been reading about in New York Magazine.
In the village,
for the past year.
Right.
And so I'm going, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, because we were there at the crack of dawn, like 5:30.
Closer to 6, but yeah.
6, we got into Mary's Fish Camp.
And it was just a teeny place where they serve fish.
Yeah. None of these places take reservations, by the way.
Yeah. Amazing that
I don't know how people ever get in.
It's amazing they take credit cards. And it was fine.
It was better than fine.
Yes. Not a lot better than fine. And you know what's great about it? Not a lot better than fine.
It was better than fine.
Yeah. Okay.
What was great about it, very good beer and wine.
Yes.
By the glass. Beer on tap.
It's the city.
Wine. Yeah. They even had Lambrusco. No one ever has Lambrusco.
Well, but it's the city. You're not out in Percy anymore. I mean,
it turns out the city is fairly cool.
Having said that, not the greatest sardines in the world, but it's a different area of emphasis. No.
Yeah, it wasn't the Blue Point Grill in Princeton.
That's right.
Which is one of the great restaurants,
great fish restaurants
of the universe.
Of the universe, yes. But
anyway,
it was a cool place to be, and it was the right thing for us then. It was a quick bite, and then we headed to Smalls, where we stood on line and held our breath to see if we get into Smalls. Smalls is a small jazz club. You just looked up how small they are.
In the basement.
How many people do
it has a capacity of somewhere around 60.
60.
I think there were more than 60.
There might have been, but even so, it's 60. So
it was a long line. You had done research.
Right.
You had talked to people and said, they said, no, don't worry about getting into Smalls.
And they were wrong.
They were wrong.
So you got online, and you were scared to death that you might have been person 61 and 62, and you wouldn't get in. You're standing on this line for a half hour. They eventually let you in, $20 a person, which is more than reasonable.
The owner is at the door taking
$20 bills in a cigar box. I mean, it's like you compared it to one of those clubs in Mrs. Maisel, and I think that was an apt comparison. And there we are down in the basement.
It's like you're in the Mrs. Maisel Coffee Club or whatever it is,
right?
But it's a fraction of the size.
And it's not as nice as the place where she's always performing her comedy act, and that says something. You're crammed in. You got a bartender who's running around like crazy making drinks, and even tougher than that, a waitress who's snaking her way through these crowds trying to sell drinks, and she's succeeding to some degree.
Well, this waitress, I was so impressed by her.
Yeah.
And she has to, you're right, the seating is just random chairs and benches crammed into rows. And this woman kind of squeezes her way in between them and waits on every single person.
Taking credit cards.
Yeah.
It was bizarre. And then
very impressive.
So Helen Sung comes in with her group, and I know you know the names of the people in the group, but just to mention, she walks in and she's there. She might as well be in your living room.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. You're 10 feet away.
Yeah. And then she plays. I mean, and that's the charm of it. You're there, and you have this great jazz pianist and her accompanist playing for an hour or so. So
Helen Sung, originally from Texas, originally planned to be a classical pianist.
Right.
Got bachelor's degree and master's degree, and then allegedly heard Harry Connick play. Harry Connick Jr.
Why not believe it? That's what she says.
Said jazz. That's where it's
This is not the only woman to be led astray after hearing Harry Connick play. I'm sure that's not. She's not alone.
Okay.
But you can tell that she's a classical background when she plays jazz piano.
But what I love about her is the just overwhelming power of her playing.
Yeah, she plays.
I mean, she is a monster. She's just amazing.
She plays in a
no matter what she's doing. So anyway, it was great. I mean, it's not like I can hum her tunes or anything, but we did have a great time, and it was kind of fun being squeezed down into that little
I would say
jazz club.
It's fair to say she almost has a percussive style, but it's very inspired. It's very interesting. I was interested that you enjoy it as much as you do because you love to tell me don't listen to that esoteric jazz. This was
not that esoteric.
Borderline, but it's fine with me.
No.
In any event, so we had a good time.
Yeah, and, if it weren't such a project to get in there, I would go more often to Smalls. Because you get a ticket for the night.
Yeah.
We only listened to one set. We could have heard both sets.
Right.
We could have heard anybody playing after.
They have another club across the street called Mesro.
That you get, entrance into Smalls, get you entrance into this.
Let me mention one other thing. I know you weren't excited by this, and I don't know how to think about it because how well can it work? But they say, if you get on the website for Smalls and Mesro, that you can stream all their performances for free.
Well, they have all these archives of performances.
Even though you can stream live all their performances. They say. I haven't tried it. I'm not guaranteeing it. But it's interesting.
But that's not what it's about.
No.
It's about being there.
Yeah, but if someone wants to check it out before you go.
Many people were not speaking English on the line.
That's right.
There are many clearly visitors, etc.
There were a lot of Scandinavians. There was some German. There were people of various ages.
Yeah, there were all kinds of people.
Very young people.
There to see
and people
the New York jazz scene.
That's right. No talk of percusy on the line. So just to
Speaking of jazz.
Just to speak out. Well, look, I mean, we spent a fair bit of time just now on this, but I think it was very interesting. Stuff we're reading in the paper, Porgy and Bess is coming to the Metropolitan Opera. It feels like there's a big production of Porgy and Bess every few years. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be.
Deservedly so.
Yeah. And of course,
there's a Wall Street Journal article, and it starts out by mentioning the two great American operas.
So what do you think of that?
Candide, which we love.
Candide,
which I love.
And Porgy and Bess. Well, look, I mean, let's just pause for a second, all right? If you're going to say what are the two great operas, there are two great U.S. operas. One's written by Bernstein and one's written by Gershwin. You go, cool, that makes sense.
But we don't know enough about music to really opine on that.
Yeah, if you ask me at gunpoint, what's the third? I would say Most Happy Fella by Frank Lesser. It's pretty damn close. But
that's an opera?
It's pretty damn close.
I don't know. We got to call in an expert.
Okay.
Mark, are you listening?
Well, we'll get to Mark later. But in any event...
Our music historian.
There's a lot of facts here about Porgy and Bess that I've kind of never quite nailed down. They nailed down for you. For example, Porgy was based on a book by DuBose Hayward, a novel called Porgy, which DuBose Hayward and his wife, Dorothy, made into a play, which was a successful play on Broadway without music. Mm-hmm. Didn't know this. Mm-hmm. And Gershwin was interested from the time he read the novel. He waited till the play had run its course. And then he sat down with DuBose Hayward and his brother Ira, and they put together the opera. And I had always heard as if it was a secret. Sondheim writes in his book, it's a secret. Nobody knows DuBose Hayward wrote some of the lyrics. They're very clear here. DuBose Hayward wrote lyrics for several songs. I could list them, but it's not that important. But 4 of the songs, lyrics by DuBose Hayward. 4 of the songs, lyrics by Ira Gershwin. They're different types of songs, but there's no secret involved in it.
The more searing, sort of emotional songs seem to be by Hayward, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that's correct.
And I Got Plenty of Nothing or Ain't Necessarily So.
Ira Gershwin.
Yeah.
And Sondheim, of course, just to complete the circle, makes the point that the DuBose Hayward lyrics, in his mind, are some of the greatest lyrics in American musical history, and then says nothing nice about Ira Gershwin's, but whatever. And they also say, they make the point here, and again, something I fully didn't appreciate, was there's a difference between what we'll call the Broadway musical, Porgy and Bess, and the opera, that it was much anticipated when the production went on the stage in October 1935. But they had cut a lot of what were called the operatic passages that Gershwin had written, that Gershwin had a great deal of pride in, that to him was quite significant. And it wasn't even that well reviewed, but that's kind of neither here nor there. The music has been preserved. Now it gets performed more than ever as an opera, and they say it stands up as an opera in part because of these passages. And he concludes, I should say, Barrymore Lawrence Scherer, who's their fine music critic, and it's a very good article. It says, ultimately, Gershwin's musical genius and Hayward's intensely human story make Porgy and Bess one of America's greatest treasures. And I think that's clearly the case. So maybe we'll see it. I don't know.
Right.
Metropolitan Opera.
Well, he also goes to lengths to say, the whole story of it is still resonates today.
Yeah.
Aspects of...
Well, that does get a little dicey, too, because then
violence,
there's the political
drugs,
correctness of it.
Poverty.
There is some
love.
There is some reluctance. The Times wrote a big article too, and the headline sort of suggested that people have some mixed feelings about Porgy because it's not fair to portray African Americans in this light, dealing with this kind of situation.
It's a limited view.
Yeah, it's a limited view, and therefore some people object. But in any event, that doesn't really interfere with enjoying Porgy and Bess.
Well, it's a complex subject, but it is amazing.
Not as complex
music.
as the Times makes it out to be. But in any event, you had something on the Washington Monument.
Really?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Washington Monument, yay, opens back up.
Yeah, I've been waiting for that.
Well, it's been closed a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize it, but it was closed for a little bit because of fears around 9/11. There had to be alterations after 9/11 to kind of protect it from terrorism. And then in 2011, there was the earthquake. Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah, there was an earthquake.
In Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, it was centered in Virginia or something.
Where was I?
I don't know, but I remember I was in a faculty meeting at Bucks County Community College.
Really?
And my desk kind of shivered.
Really? The earth moved?
Yes, the earth moved.
You didn't tell me about that.
At least once.
There you go. Good for you.
In my lifetime.
Something.
Thank goodness. And there was some damage. Yeah. And they actually sent climbers rappelling down the sides of the monument to check for cracks, etc. And then it closed, it was closed till 2014.
And now it's back.
No, then they opened it for a little while. Then they decided they had to work on the elevator.
This is your government. This is my tax dollars at work.
Right.
Yes.
They had to, the elevator needed to be redone. Yes, well, so I don't know, 5 years.
I'm very sensitive to elevator repairs.
Fix the elevator.
I'm sure.
But the reason why we love the Washington Monument.
I'm waiting for that. Why is that?
Because it's an obelisk.
Oh, of course.
Okay. Who doesn't love an obelisk? Okay.
I'll pass the obvious joke. Go ahead,
the Egyptians like to say that it was a petrified ray of the sun, like Aten, the god of Aten.
Yeah.
Aten. I don't know how you pronounce it. My Egyptian's not that good. And it's these, this tall thing with a little pyramid on the top.
Yeah.
Okay? Let's face it. It's pretty much a petrified penis. Okay?
Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. That's why people love it. Who doesn't love a giant penis?
Oh, my God. Stop
it. So the Egyptians were the only people to carve obelisks, but they did it the best. And they did a lot of it. Yeah. But you know what is interesting?
I'm afraid
as many obelisks as they made, there are many more. There are in Rome alone, there are twice the number of obelisks than are left in Egypt at this time. The minute people came and saw them, they said, I got to get me some of that. And they took them home. Okay. And so the interesting thing to me is,
yes,
why does the Washington Monument end up being an obelisk? And this is why. Yeah. Okay. In the 1830s, Paris gets an obelisk. Okay. And it is put up in Paris. Eventually, London feels they need an obelisk. Because let's face it, places like London and New York want to run with the big dogs, and Paris is the big dog. Okay, so Egypt gives the UK an obelisk. Eventually, they raise enough money privately to get the obelisk from Egypt to London, and they put it up. And almost immediately, the United States wants one too. And they are given an obelisk by Egypt, okay? And private money is raised to bring it over to the U.S. This is all in the 1870s, okay? The London goes up in 1878. The U.S. one finally opens 1880. You know who pays for a lot of that? Vanderbilt. Yeah. Vanderbilt pays $100,000 to help raise this Cleopatra's Needle, it's called. Right behind the Met. I've showed it to you a number of times.
But what happened to the Washington Monument?
Here's the deal.
Yeah.
So, going back to Paris, getting theirs in 1830s.
Yeah.
Okay. Congress has, in the U.S., has agreed to allot money for a monument to Washington. There's a competition for the designs of the monument. A guy named, I think his name is Robert Mills from South Carolina, shout out to South Carolina, wins the competition, and his design is an obelisk. Okay, obelisks have begun to be popular. All right, because Paris has one. All right. They start building the Washington Monument.
Yeah.
And guess what happens? Civil War.
Okay.
Money dries up. Interest dries up. Okay. It takes them a while. It takes Congress a while to get back into building this. And by the time, these other obelisks are set up in London and New York, obelisks are all the rage, and they get that Washington Monument built. Okay? The magic of an obelisk is that it's a solid piece of stone. It ain't magical if it ain't solid. Okay? In fact, there's one that was never finished, that was left in the quarry, in the Aswan. Okay? Still there. We can see it today because it had a crack.
Okay.
Right? It needs to be solid. So that makes the Washington Monument kind of problematic. It's not solid.
Right.
It's all these little blocks.
Right. I don't understand why it's interesting at all, to be perfectly frank with you. The Washington Monument has never interested me. The Lincoln Monument looks like Lincoln. That one I understand.
But the way I explain to my students, okay, that makes it okay, that this obelisk has little pieces, because it's like the United States. Okay. One out of many. Here's another interesting thing. On the tip top, it has an aluminum cap. Okay? A little baby, almost like a pyramid on the top of aluminum. Yeah. It was the largest piece of aluminum casting at the time. It cost a fortune because at the time, aluminum was selling for the same price as silver. 2 years later, all right, a new process is invented for casting aluminum, and the price of aluminum plummets.
This sounds like...
It would have been so cheap.
This sounds like your
standard... a couple of years.
Your standard government project, which is a disaster. It takes forever, and it comes in way over budget.
It's open. It's free. Yeah. We can go back.
I think free is a funny word.
It has a good view.
I wouldn't use the word free. Okay, well, let's just see if we can move things along here. There was a short... There was a story that became big on ESPN. You must understand by now that nobody's more sentimental than sports fans. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way it is. And so there was a big sentimental moment last week having to do with Mike Yastrzemski. Mike Yastrzemski is the grandson of Carl Yastrzemski. Carl Yastrzemski, you know, right, Tamsen?
I do.
Okay, so he played...
I don't know personally, but I know, people revere him.
From Long Island. He played...
And in fact, somebody in the yearbook, the year ahead of me, actually posed in like a Carl Yastrzemski batting pose for her senior picture.
In any event, I don't know what year that was, but Carl Yastrzemski's big year is 1967, so I don't know.
This was after 67.
Yeah, so Carl Yastrzemski, just to give you an idea, played more games for the Boston Red Sox than any player besides him played for any other franchise. That's how much of an iconic figure he was. And 1967 was...
I think they called him Yaz. Or the Yaz.
No, Yaz.
Yaz.
And 1967 was the big year. He won the Triple Crown. Led the league in home runs, RBIs, and batting average, which hadn't happened for many years. The team got to the World Series, which was a big thing for Boston. They did not win the World Series. There was the whole Boston curse, but they came close. He was the last batter, came close, tried to hit a home run, didn't quite make it. 2004 was the year the Red Sox finally broke the curse and won the World Series. But that was a painful year for Carl Yastrzemski because his only son, Mike, who was a minor league baseball player, former minor league baseball player at 43, died. He had a heart attack after hip surgery. And he'd never made it to the major leagues. His son, Mike Yastrzemski, was the subject of what happened this week.
So Mike is the grandson.
So Mike Yastrzemski is in high school and he's a pretty good ball player. And he's now going, this is some years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, being recruited for college. And one of the colleges, which is just making a push to build a big program, is Vanderbilt. And the coach of Vanderbilt is, guess what? A huge Carl Yastrzemski fan, a huge Boston fan. And he sees this kid, Mike Yastrzemski, he's obviously related, and he says, I'm recruiting him, and I'm looking at him, and I say to myself, look at him as if he's Mike Smith. Look at him if he's Mike Smith. He can't get carried away by this Yastrzemski thing. And he can't help himself. The kid reminds him of Yastrzemski. Reminds him of Carl. He's got the leadership. He looks that way. He can't help himself. He recruits him. What happens? Huge star. Huge career. Vanderbilt goes to the Little League World Series, and now they're one of the best programs. And sure enough, the kid gets drafted to be in the major leagues.
Wait a minute. Vanderbilt's
a very good baseball team. I could name 5.
You said Little League World Series.
No, I'm sorry. College World Series.
Okay.
Vanderbilt's College World Series.
Because that would be cheating.
Right. That would be
to
cheating.
send a college team to the Little League World Series. If you sent Princeton,
it would be all right. But Vanderbilt, no. So in any event, but a lot of guys in the majors now played at Vanderbilt. But Mike Yastrzemski can't break through. Finally, after 6 or 7 years, gets traded to the Giants. They bring him to the majors, and he catches on. He starts hitting home runs. And sure enough, this is rookie year. He's had a great year. He's established himself as a major leaguer. And as it happens sometimes, San Francisco Giants were scheduled to play an interleague game against the Boston Red Sox in Fenway just last week. And there he is. And who do they have to throw the first pitch of the game? To Mike Yastrzemski, Carl. And the grandfather throws to the grandson. And it's a big emotional moment, and people go crazy. And what happens when Mike gets up? Home run. And, of course, people erupt. And, that's all there is to say about it. Really, it's a nice moment. And they interviewed Carl, and he said, the only way I can compare it to anything would be if I compare it to the 67 season. That's what it means to me, him being here. So, good story.
Very nice. Very nice. And there's a picture of Yaz there. Right, yes. He looks pretty good.
He does.
He's got to be like a zillion years old.
I'll do the math while you start talking.
Okay. All right. In your head, I bet.
Of course.
So, I know you feel I've already overstepped the bounds of art talk today, but I'm just going to give a little museum update. Ding, ding, ding. Fans of John Singer Sargent might want to drop by the Morgan Library. And you know I'm a big fan of the Morgan Library. It's
and John Singer Sargent.
Yes, I do like John Singer Sargent, although this article about him mentions that he never called himself John Singer Sargent. He signed his works John S. Sargent, and he never used Singer, but we all like it. We like the way that sounds, John Singer Sargent.
Okay.
But anyway, it is John Singer Sargent, Portraits in Charcoal. And, he's famous for his portraits. And I do always say, and I know I've said it on this podcast, I would have loved to have a portrait done by John Sargent. He makes everybody look richer and taller and thinner. All right. So he ends up doing portraiture. He studies in Paris, and he has a big scandal when his portrait of Madame X is presented at the Paris Salon in 1884. It's for a lot of reasons. It's a total flop. He's devastated, runs off to England in distress and shame, and perhaps convinced that his career is in El Toiletto. El
Toiletto?
El Toiletto. And actually, he has a buddy. He's actually been befriended by Henry James.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
I can see where this is going.
This article mentions that, he's famous for doing all these portraits of this person, that person, and, Churchill and Henry James. Henry James actually helps him create his career in portraiture, makes connections for him in England with all these wealthy dames, etc. Yeah. So it's a little more important than that. Anyway, he turns to charcoal at a certain point because it's easier, faster, and I guess he doesn't need the money as much at a certain point. And he's more interested in doing other kinds of works. But so these charcoal portraits are later. They're fun. They seem to have a certain life to them. And I want to remind the audience that I read a great book about Sargent and his subjects called Sargent's Women, 4 Lives Behind the Canvas by the author Donna Lucy. Very fun book, description of some very fun characters from that late 19th century, turn of the 20th century period, including Isabella Stewart Gardner, who was a pip.
Okay. All right.
Done.
All right. So Yastrzemski must be in his mid-80s, and he doesn't even stay at games anymore because he's just not comfortable sitting at ball games.
He's only in his 80s?
Yeah. In 1967, you can do the math. I figure he's about 30-something. Figure get it from there. But in any event, Blue Point Lager, that's they brew that in the town that he grew up in, if that means anything. So the movies. I want to say something about movies. We don't talk about movies lately, and it's about the time of year you might say, oh, this might be Best Picture. It turns out there aren't any candidates for Best Picture this year. They won't be giving a Best Picture this year. Of course they will. But you know what's the favorite? Here's something I want to introduce you, Tamsen.
What?
A movie that we mentioned last week, or more to the point, Armand mentioned last week. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the favorite to win the Oscar for Best Picture this year. How do you like that? According to the New York Times, no lesser authority than the New York Times, they say unless people get excited about The Irishman, which is the Scorsese movie coming up, which is the same as all his other movies, except instead of Italian gangsters, they're Irish gangsters, or Little Women, which is now will be remade for this 30th time. It's going to be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And because that's the way it's shaping up. There are a lot of reasons. One is it's a pretty decent movie. They feel that Tarantino ought to win a Best Picture at some point in time. It made enough money. It made about $130 million. And its major competition isn't that exciting, in part because, number one, perhaps it's Noah Baumbach's upcoming marriage story with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson, but no one's over the moon about that. And then you have some other pictures which are Netflix produced, and there's a bias in terms of the Oscars against the Netflix pictures, and even they are not that exciting. Besides The Irishman, there's The Two Popes, which is an interesting conversation between two popes, but I can't see that going anywhere. That's Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce. There's Ford versus Ferrari, which is a race car drama by Disney. I don't think doesn't sound like a winner, notwithstanding that Christian Bale's in it. There's Jojo Rabbit, and we've seen the previews of that in the movie theaters, which is a whimsical take on Nazi Germany that has divided critics. And finally, there was the winner at the latest film festival was Joker. And a lot of people are getting excited about Joker, with Joaquin Phoenix, and I'm sure that's going to be an interesting movie, but it's not going to be Best Picture, frankly. And then you've got things like Judy, about Judy Garland and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, with Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, and Dolomite Is My Name, with Eddie Murphy. Those aren't going to be Best Picture either. So, I think we know. I think it's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. More to the point.
Well, don't you think we ought to see it then?
I think we have to.
All right.
I think we should see it.
We should go to the movies.
We'll have to. But there's not that much to see. Not that much to see. Go ahead. Parmalat.
Parmalat.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to squeeze in some more art here.
Yes, good.
Art/business.
By all means.
All right. So, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about an art auction that's coming up. Yeah. It's the art that belonged to Callisto Tanzi, who was the founder of Parmalat. Yeah. Okay, the sort of dairy giant of Italy. Yeah. That kind of went into bankruptcy in 2003 because of a massive accounting fraud discovered, where they were, siphoning money off. Callisto Tanzi was siphoning money off from the business. And, there was all this kind of accounting stuff going on. They had hidden that they had like a $14 billion loss, all All right, and people found out that also in the Cayman Islands, they had an account in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah.
That turned out to be empty. Well, apparently it was in Callisto's pockets. He had absconded with 500 million euros, allegedly, of investors' money. Mm-hmm. So anyway, he goes to jail. Doesn't really go to jail. He's on house arrest. He's older, he's ill, etc. But at the point when he's, getting indicted or whatever, he turns out to be squirreling away his art collection, okay, in basements, in his daughter's house, in his friends' houses, and he's in the process of trying to sell all this art before the government can get their hands on it. And what happens is, I guess a TV show of some kind does some investigative reporting and finds out there's about to be a big sale go down with a Russian billionaire. Those Russian billionaires, they buy a lot of art. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they are able to find some Monets, Kandinsky, Picasso, etc., squirreled away. They get all these other tips. And in 2009, they find all this art that belonged to him. Now, it's been 10 years. It's taken them to put together this big auction in Milan that is happening at the end of October. Meanwhile, a lot of the lesser art has been for sale online. And apparently, that might have closed by now, but apparently there were big bargains to be had. Now, there are Monets, Picassos, etc. Most of them are, lesser works. Nonetheless, they're by big names. So they say this auction will net either, the conservative estimate is like 5 to 6 euros, sure, but might go as high as 12 million euros. When I say 5 to 6 euros, I mean 5 to 6 million euros. Right. So this money will go back to, again, to try to help repay investors for their losses, which it doesn't begin to pay. But, it's an interesting and complex story.
Yeah, well, that's the way crime often is. It's hard to really unpack it. It's hard to know what motivated this guy, honestly. You would think he had enough money. I mean, really. But in any event, okay, quickly, Rod Laver. So there's an interesting story about Rod Laver. It only comes up because there is a team competition that has been put together, founded by the management group of Roger Federer, that's sort of caught on in the last few years. It's played in Geneva, and it's called the Laver Cup. And it's named after Rod Laver. Why? Because Roger Federer wanted it named after Rod Laver. And Rod Laver was a great tennis player, in my lifetime considered the greatest tennis player, sometimes known as the Rocket. And he's still alive. And as Federer says, Federer talks about the fact that he won 2 Grand Slams. Laver won 2 Grand Slams. The Grand Slam being Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, the French Open, and the Australian Open. So the idea is to win those 4 major competitions in the same year. Laver did it twice. But what's interesting, and what the story reminded me of, were the circumstances, because he won it first in 1962 as a young player, Laver being one of many great Australian players, and Australia dominated tennis at that time. And then afterward, he dropped out of the amateur ranks and he went to the pro ranks. At that point in time, to play in these kind of tournaments, you had to be an amateur. You made very little money. Once you went to the pros, you were with these renegades who were on tour, people like Jack Kramer, people like Bobby Riggs. Mm-hmm. And they would charge money, and they were better players, frankly. Mm-hmm. But they were frozen out of the main tournaments. So he went 4 or 5 years where he couldn't play in these tournaments. And then he came back, and in the second year back, he came back. These became open tournaments in 1968. And in 1969, he won the Grand Slam again. Mm-hmm. And they asked him how he did it. And he says now, how I did it was, when I played with the pros, where all these guys stayed with the amateurs,
I played at higher competition.
Exactly. I became a better player.
Yeah.
So I came back, and it wasn't that hard for me to come back and beat these guys who were, after all, amateurs. And so he won it twice. As Federer says here, it was an amazing accomplishment. And Federer says he modeled his on-court demeanor after Laver. It's not just what he achieved, but the way he carries himself. And they ask Laver, as they ask all these players, how he feels he stacks up to the current players. And he says, I'm not going to get into that. And they said, okay, fine. Who would you like to play among these current players, if you could? And he said, I'd like to play Federer, but I'd like him to use my wooden racket, and I'll use his.
We're rushing along here because we're a little bit nervous about getting a chance to watch the Giants game.
Oh, God.
Because, as we all know, good old Eli has been benched in favor of the rookie. What's his name? Daniel Jones?
Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of emotions going on here. Okay, we want the Giants to win, right? We want the...
I'm not that emotional about
You don't care?
No.
But
there's no mixed...
The last time Eli got benched...
there's no mixed feelings about
it. The Giants were worse without him. And then they brought him back.
Yeah.
And now the Giants are still bad.
The Giants' problems go far beyond the quarterback position. So whether they win or lose this game is going to have much more to do with the defense than the quarterback. And, Daniel Jones' career... what he does in the first few games is not that indicative of how his career is going to go. He's going to struggle at the beginning. We're not going to get overly excited about it. So we'll see. If the Giants happen to win a couple of games and they stir a little excitement up, all the better. But what you're really looking for is improvement in the team going forward in the future. And, Eli's career, if it wasn't clearly over, it was pretty close to over. So we all live with this.
Well, do you think there's a leader that will replace him?
The quarterback. The quarterback and the running back.
You think he can do that?
Saquon
seems like he has a lot of charisma.
Saquon was drafted for that reason. Yeah. When Gettleman drafted Saquon, as you know, I spoke to Gettleman directly about this at Mohawk. Those who missed that episode was me and Dave Gettleman right before I went to the hot tub.
Dan's tongue is in his cheek as he
No, I did talk to Gettleman about it.
You did?
Yes. And he said to me, I I told him how I thought about his draft. He was, of course, interested.
Are you sure you talked to him or you just talked to him you reran the meeting
I talked to him.
In your head later?
I talked to him and I said, look, Dave. Can I call you Dave? I said, Dave. This is all true, by the way. I said, Dave, I like the running back. I like that pick. And he knew who I was talking about. And he said to me, he's a special young man. But that's why Gettleman drafted him. Gettleman didn't just draft him because he was the best running back or even the best athlete. He drafted him because he was drafting someone to build the team around.
He was the full package.
Personality, everything. And Gettleman believes in that.
Okay.
And Daniel Jones won't be able to be that guy for a couple of years because he's not going to have that kind of accomplishments. But the running back's already the best running back in football. So he will be the guy they line up behind. So we'll see. The Giants are a work in progress. There was a short piece on Jay Leno. And usually we don't get into these interviews, 20-odd questions, the journal says. But, Leno's okay, I guess. I think he said some decent things in the interview. Nothing too deep. He collects cars now. We all know he's loaded.
He's been collecting cars since he was 11.
But he doesn't.
Okay? He found a car on the side of the road and played with it till he could make it run.
Yeah.
And then he and his buddies would drive it around the backyard.
All right, he's been collecting cars for a long time.
The man likes cars.
But the other thing is
the man likes to tinker.
He also likes stand-up. He still does stand-up. in small venues. And here's his quote. He says, I've never been on vacation in my life. If I get a gig in Shanghai, my wife can poke around and I can go to work. Jerry Seinfeld and I talk about this all the time. What happens if we went on vacation and found out we liked it? As soon as I slack off, that's the beginning of the end. So there's a guy who's still working at it. He loves what he does, and he feels that the car stuff is a good balance. And his philosophy, he says, life is not that hard. Dale Carnegie said it. Be honest, accept your faults, protect your troops. Okay? His secret, he said he had a secret as a talk show host, is interviewing people taught me to be a way better listener. Most people aren't really listening, have no idea how to carry on a conversation. Are you listening to this? They're waiting for people to stop talking so they can start talking.
I think that's 100% true.
It is 100% true. It is 100% true. And he's right about that.
I'm always repeating that kind of idea to myself.
Right.
Shut up
And listen.
I aspire to do that better.
And here's one thing he said, which I think is true and it's hard to accept. He said, I work in a business that's subjective. This is the comedy business. Some people think you suck. Some people think you're great. The problem is they're both right. So there you go. Anyway, I thought there was something. So finally, obituary, Phyllis Newman died. So Phyllis Newman, I think I was more familiar with Phyllis Newman than you were. Is that fair?
I think she's more of a New York personality.
She is. So she was, but there are a couple of funny stories about this. She was a musical comedy figure for some years. And she was married to Adolph Green, who was a songwriter with Betty Comden. Betty Comden and Adolph Green did quite a few shows. Phyllis Newman was first nominated for a Tony for Subways Are for Sleeping, and that turned out to be her greatest moment in terms of getting awards in the theater. She was a supporting actress nominee. She was in competition with a young Barbra Streisand, and they were often compared later. Barbra Streisand being in I Can Get It For You Wholesale, and Phyllis Newman won. And after that, their careers went in different directions. But and she would always joke about being totally connected because of Betty Comden and Adolph Green, and Leonard Bernstein worked with them and all this stuff. But she never did very well getting parts for whatever reason, at least not the parts she wanted. But she even talked about how she got the part for Subways Are for Sleeping. And here's the quote. She said, "My husband watched me audition." He had written it. Said, "My husband watched me audition 5 times, she said. I was livid. Believe me, this was the first time an actress got the part by not sleeping with the author."
All right.
So there you go. So that's all we have. We have to watch the Giants to see what the future holds. And until next week.
This is Tamsen Granger.
And Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan, read the paper.